can we start with you introducing yourself to our audience and just talking a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So I am Rowan Ellis, and at the moment I'm doing like YouTube creatory stuff full time. So I make video essays about LGBTQ plus like issues, topics, pop culture on YouTube, and then also do lots of other random bits and bobs like workshops and talks and all that jazz, and also apparently writing a book. That's also a thing that's happened. So yeah, I feel like I'm just kind of flitting between all of these exciting sort of like projects, like podcast stuff, YouTube stuff, everything. And then this is the first sort of non-digital creator type endeavor that I've gone into. So it's very exciting.
And I'd love to hear more about, just how you got into this career field and, got inspired by this all. But I also want to just talk a little bit kind of about your journey and your discovery of your sexuality, because I know that's such a big part of the book. So what was your childhood like and how did that go?
So I was exceptionally lucky in my childhood in that my family has always been very supportive. I have an older brother who's gay, and I kind of knew from a very young age that like that was not kind of going to be an issue with my family, with my parents. And I was talking to my dad about this the other day because I hadn't really figured out the timeline in my head. So I asked him, was it that I found out that my brother was gay and then I was really into like, equality, gay rights, let's go, because I knew that I was very passionate about it before I came out or like realized that I was gay. And he was like, no, you've just always kind of just been like that. So I was like, okay, well, clearly it was like just something in the air around my family. And so I actually for a long time was like just kind of assumed I was straight. Not because I had any particularly straight feelings, just because I was like, yeah, this is just the default, this is just how it goes. I guess I'd know if I wasn't, right? Surely. And so I was, going to Pride to be like supportive for my friends and like go like talking about like getting involved in activism and like LGBTQ plus equality, just to be a good ally and like all of this kind of stuff. And then it was almost like when I started to actually think about it, it kind of became obvious. I think I just had not really thought about it for a while. And I think one of the reasons why, which I think I didn't really properly clock until long after I had realized I was gay, is the part of my like queer identity which is on the asexual spectrum, that I wasn't necessarily having these really strong feelings for girls, that I think with the very stereotypical portrayal of lesbians, most often I think on a quick Google search link to pornography, was not really my vibe. I was like, well, I couldn't possibly be, because none of this is really working for me. And then I had to really have a sit down with myself and be like, Rowan, is it working with boys though? Is that happening either? And I was like, that also is not happening. So I guess I've got to try and figure out what is going on here. And so yeah, I feel exceptionally lucky that my whole journey of self-discovery and then coming out was not really fraught with sort of internalized homophobia or external from like people who I was genuinely close to. Had it from other sources, but not from people that I considered to be like family or friends. And by the time I had left my high school, I was like fully out. I was chosen to go on this Stonewall charity like young activist retreat. Like it was very much like, okay, this is me now. We've very rapidly just launched ourselves out of the closet into a life of like advocacy. And I've kind of been trying to continue that ever since, basically.
And you mentioned just, like Googling and kind of looking up things. So when you were on that discovery, and were there things that you could look at? Was there books that you read or videos that you looked to kind of help out with that?
So when I was growing up, there was not a lot, to be honest. So I, well, specifically, I was having a look at some websites which on like kind of looking for stuff at school for kind of support groups, things like that. Not necessarily for myself, but that was how I ended up finding out that there was a block system on the school computers that would block things like pornography and gambling, and also apparently lesbian and gay content, which I found out one lunchtime, and that was like a big thing that I was and a couple of my friends were very much into trying to turn around at my school, let's say. Didn't get very far with an ultimately very homophobic senior leadership team at the time. And we went through two different head teachers at the time, and both of them were just not, that was like never going to happen. They were like, these, we couldn't possibly, these children could see this. And their compromise that they very sort of like as if they were giving us this great gift that they suggested was that students over the age of 16 could come to the senior leadership team and request a password in order to access the content, which is not exactly the most really thinking about the reality of someone who is trying to use these helplines or support sites, probably not going to be the best way of going about it. And so I actually found a lot of information, not necessarily through sort of kind of fact-based Wikipedia type websites, but more stuff that was personal stories. I was part of an online forum called the Queer Youth Network that I don't know if it still exists anymore. It very much was like that 2000s forum, traditional forum type thing. And they used to do meetups in London that I would go to. And those, I feel like the friendships and the kind of information and discussions that I had with those young people, like ultimately informed so much of my knowledge of queerness and of the community. And I feel very like lucky, I guess, in a way, that a lot of the people who were active at the time were trans members of the community. So I have like never been in a position of being a member of the community and having any sort of ignorance or lack of understanding or lack of like knowing people who are trans, because we've obviously seen how this sort of like fear or ignorance can drive like wedges between different people within the community. And I feel like especially right now in the UK, the trans community are the ones who like bear the brunt of a lot of that. And so I feel very like privileged to have learned a lot of my initial knowledge of activism, knowledge of justice from like trans teenagers who are the same age as me, who were and some a bit older who were kind of like mentor figures who were just doing like incredible work at the time, and were the most like lovely, wonderful people. So yeah, it was very much kind of like rather than just dry knowledge, the community side of things was all very linked into that for me. And I feel like that was a really healthy way of being able to find out about yourself and find out about your community, especially because it also meant that a lot of the information that's online about queer stuff can tend towards extremes. It can tend towards like tragedy, it can tend towards sexualization, or like outright homophobia, transphobia. And so I felt like, yeah, it was just a really positive introduction for me. And I was kind of hoping with the book to be able to do that, to acknowledge the difficulties that young queer girls might be going through, but also give a lot of hope and talk about the joy of being queer and all this kind of stuff as well.
Yes, absolutely. I know that it's really difficult, scrolling through and you're trying to balance finding just entertainment news, but also making sure you know all the facts and the laws and all that stuff that's going on. And it definitely sounds like you had that educated background because you were just surrounded by people who were able to, show you resources, or you were able to find them eventually. But I know a lot of queer stories now, they're becoming more in the media, and we're finding them in like Disney, big companies like that. But do you think LGBTQ representation has improved or expanded in recent years?
I definitely think it's improved. I don't think it's where it needs to be. I think that we still have like the sort of Disney big companies global companies that have a huge amount of cultural impact are still way far behind where they should be. And I think that we can't kind of take those advances for granted, but we also can't kind of just pat ourselves on the back for having like a scattering of characters. And so I think a place where there has been big leaps, and I think is going to have a really huge impact, is in children's media. So it wasn't like just, 5 years ago when we were having this be like completely censored. We had a lot of these cartoons that would later come out that the writers had really wanted there to be queer characters, and they were shut down by the studios. And I think in recent years we've really had this improvement in stories for kids, stories for like up until I guess middle grade in the US, where having queer characters talking about queer stuff was seen as normal and just like a thing that was essentially just showing the reality of the world around us, right? Like there will be some kids who will be watching that who are queer, who have queer family, who just, live in the world in which queer people are around, and therefore should probably know about them. And so just get Steffi out there. And yeah, so it's very much improved, but not quite where I think it should be.
Absolutely. I think a lot of us agree, we love to see the direction we're headed, but there's always more to be done. There's always more room to improve. And that's why I'm excited about your book. I have it here that's coming to help people. And so I'd love to talk about it, just, getting into the structure and the topics, and like, obviously the visuals are amazing. You have a great author that came along with it, but if you could just talk about what inspired you to take on this project and why you chose the topics to include that you did.
So I was approached by the publisher. They were looking to do a book for queer girls, and they were looking for someone to write it. And they kind of approached me and said, would you be up for essentially giving it a go in terms of thinking about what topics you would include if you wrote this, like coming up with a plan for the different chapters you do, like writing maybe the first couple of chapters to see whether your writing's up to scratch. And so I did that and really crossed my fingers that they would turn around and be like, yeah, no, it's not great, is it? We're going to pass on this. But they really liked it. And then the person who had pitched it kind of took it to the rest of the publishers and in a kind of like pitch meeting, and they all really loved it. And we went ahead with it and found Jackie, our amazing illustrator, who just did like such wonderful work creating these like kind of characters that go across the book, these really emotive illustrations that make it very much kind of like a nice, warm, joyous, like lighthearted element to it, rather than, just text across the screen. So yeah, I basically had to think about all of the things that I would have wanted to know about when I was that age, like all of the things that I felt like I didn't have enough information on, or that was really interesting to me, stuff that I had seen people struggling more recently. I'd done some workshops and talks and Q&As and stuff for young people before. So thinking about things I've been asked about that might be useful, and also like experiences outside of my own, because I've got 4 people who have come in to do kind of guest writing or interviews within the book, just because it's this, like, the book is this introductory guide. It's like, here's the basics, like here is some extra stuff in here are loads of different topics, like from there you can probably branch off into the specific things you're interested in, dig more into a thing I've mentioned, like get excited about this topic, and here are some other people who share kind of the idea of queer girl sort of resonates with them and their identity. Here is some stuff that they want to talk about that maybe also overlaps into their interests that might be different to mine, their identities or their experiences that might be different to mine. Because ultimately, like, everyone who picks up the book is going to be unique in their own way. And I don't mean that in like a schmaltzy way. I mean that like genuinely, like everyone has different experiences, everyone has different relationships with their identity, with other people in their identity, with how they want to conceptualize it, if they want it to be a huge part of their life, or if they want it to just be the background, and not necessarily connect to it on an everyday level. Like, trying to include every possible iteration in a book is impossible. So I was trying to just pick out the stuff that felt like it would connect to the most people within the community.
I was definitely going to ask that because you seemed hesitant about, writing the book, and it's a very daunting task to, especially when you grew up and you knew what it was like trying to discover your sexuality, to take on the task of helping others do that. But it sounds like you figured out, you did basic topics, and I think a lot of people don't always understand just the definitions and the flags and things like that that really are very helpful when you're growing up, and you had a great team behind you. So I really think it did come together. Was there a favorite part about writing it that kind of surprised you?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that trying to surprise is an interesting one. Looking at the timeline was really interesting. So I have a timeline of kind of events and key milestones in the history of like queer women. And that was really interesting because I feel like a lot of the time when we see timelines of queer history, a lot of the time it sort of focuses on men. I guess primarily because in history, like that's kind of what history in general has focused on. They're often the people who have the most access historically to like education, to power, like all of this kind of stuff that would mean that they make it into mainstream news and they make it into these positions of firsts, of this and that, all that kind of stuff. And so it was kind of, I guess, surprising for me. A lot of this stuff I already knew about, like I could have written it without research because I'd done so much research previously, or had my own personal experiences or spoken to people in order to feel like I could talk about the idea of like, how do you figure out your sexuality? Like, what are some ways to come out? Like, why might people come out or choose not to? Like, all of those topics felt like I was really familiar with them. But this was one where there was very specific dates and specific things to talk about that I needed to dig into and pick like different ones from not just as like the UK, for example, but around the world. And so, yeah, I think that was a really interesting part of the book for me.
And it's all about advice and just trying to help people. So, would you be able to share advice that you would give to your younger self with what you know now?
Oh my goodness, little Rowan, what am I gonna tell you? I think that I would tell her, "You're gay, you idiot." No, I wouldn't. I would just like all those times that you were like saying to people that you weren't
Yeah.
gay. But like specifically, I would be like, because I genuinely was like, there's nothing wrong with being gay. So I was like, it was almost like the most insulting thing for me was that they thought that it was an insult that they were giving me. And I was like, how dare you say lesbian as if it's a bad thing? Like, I'm not a lesbian, but that's a really mean thing to do. And now I'm like, oh, they were right the whole time. So now we just realized I know. So here's the thing. I don't know if I have any advice for younger me, because I genuinely feel like this journey of discovery that I've gone on, and that I think a lot of queer people go on to like figure out who they are, to figure out what they want, all that kind of stuff, is like had to come through learning. Like it had to come through figuring stuff out. And I actually think that one of the like true joys and gifts of queerness, for me at least, is that it gives you the space to do that, because you are separated in some ways to like heteronormativity, to this assumption of this is how your life will go, and that if you don't do this, like you're a failure. If you don't find a man, if you don't get married and have kids and whatever, your life is a failure. I think once you've gotten to that point of realizing that that will never be your life, after that it's just freedom. Like after that it's just like, oh, I can do what is going to be most like healthy and happy for me. Like I can do something that's going to bring like joy and light and experiences and whatever to myself and to the people around me. I get to decide who is important to me. I get to decide, like, all of these kind of things are very freeing. And I feel like that's like, maybe I would tell myself that a bit sooner, like that's the thing, that's like an opportunity rather than the thing to worry about. But I think ultimately all of like the lessons that I've learned along the way, not to be really cringe about it, but ultimately add up to this real strength in realizing that you have had to really think about yourself and who you are, and like not take any of it for granted. And I think that's a really positive thing.
No, I love that. I thank you for sharing that. I agree 100%. Is there anything else about the book that you would like to talk about?
So I think it's worth mentioning, and I wish it didn't have to be mentioned, but I feel like it does, that this book is like explicitly trans inclusive. So when we're talking about queer girls, we're talking about anyone who resonates with that label, whether they're cis or trans, whether they fall somewhere in the non-binary realm, but still like that label for themselves in one way or another. Like that is very much something within the book. So for example, we have a section on sex and relationships, and there's no assumptions made around like what your body or your genitals will look like as a queer girl. So we have kind of various different types of sex that you can have, and it will involve all kinds of different mixtures of genitals, because ultimately like those are all types of sex that queer girls could be having. And so like one of the things that I really wanted to do to kind of connect with that was when I was asking the guest writers to come on. We have Michaela, who's a trans woman, a friend of mine who I have got to hang out with most at Disney World, which is to just be lesbians in Disney World again, you know what I mean? And knew she was an amazing writer, and really wanted to hear some stuff from her, but then also not specifying that was what she needed to write about. So not kind of being like, hi, can you write about being trans? Like, can that just be the thing? It's just like, hey, we'd love to hear something about your experiences, and whatever that looks like. And similarly, Annie, I had a chat to and was like, hey, like I know that you identify as non-binary, but I know you've also talked about identifying with kind of like adjacent to womanhood, and like kind of these labels that include girlhood and womanhood in some kind of way. Like, would you be interested in writing something for us? Because I was also really conscious of the fact that some people who pick up the book will be on the journey out of girlhood, almost like it might be gifted to them, and they might pick it up while they're still trying to figure out like, am I a girl? Like, is this a thing I still vibe with? Like, I don't quite know. And I wanted there to be space for them to like appreciate a history that they might be part of, in a culture that they might be part of, or they might be leaving, but still feel like there was inclusion there. Because I think there's so many blurred like boundaries, and it's not like here is one thing and then the other. Like there's a lot of middle ground and messy gray areas, and so we just wanted it to be as kind of inclusive as possible, while still being specific. So talking about it being for queer girls very specifically, because there are particular experiences of like misogyny, for example, that will affect them in a very particular way, and so we wanted to talk about that, but not necessarily limit who was allowed to have that label or to feel connected to that idea. It's kind of just whoever the book resonates with, it's a book for you if it does.
So when can people buy the book?
They can pre-order it right now. Very exciting. It's kind of funny because it's when this happens, like you announce the book and people can pre-order straight away, and then you're like, yeah, let's go, and then you have to wait for like 3 to 6 months for the book to actually come out, and you're like, still available to pre-order, everyone. But the book itself will come out at the start of May. So if you pre-order, basically it just means that the book will arrive at your house on that day. You won't have to go out to the shops and buy it, and you won't have to worry about it being sold out. But you can get it in stores. You'll be able to see it in bookstores at the beginning of May.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about it, and congratulations on the book.